usual is that this is the only festival for which there are some Jewish communities that celebrate one day, and another set of Jewish communities that celebrate a different day. So, we'll talk about that, about the places that celebrate both. But there are 2 days. The only reason why they separate both is because they're not sure which one it is. But if for people that know where they are, for people in unwalled cities, they celebrate today, that is Yud Dalet, and people in walled cities like here, Jerusalem, tomorrow night. We davened Ma'ariv tonight, and then we broke our fast. The rest of the Jewish world, millions of people, everyone outside of Jerusalem, listen to the Megillah tonight. Wow. And we're going to have to wait till tomorrow to find out the story.
People out of this city read it tonight.
Nachon, exactly. Everywhere in the world, apart from this holy city, the people are reading the book of Esther tonight. So I really want to spend our time looking at 2 things. First of all, the text, looking at the text of the Megillah, and then also talking, like you said, about which cities keep walled, which cities keep on the 14th, which cities keep on the 15th, why these ones on the 14th, why they're on the 15th. That's like the first part, looking at the text and looking at the division. And then the second part, I want to look at perhaps a little bit of Chassidut to try and understand the significance, the holiness of the 14th, and why that's relevant for unwalled cities, and the holiness of the 15th, and why that's relevant to walled cities. But we're going to start our story in source number 1. Source number 1 is from right at the end of the book of Esther. Right at the end of the book of Esther, we read about this decision to have 2 days. Now look at how the story is told. I'm going to read it in English. Is that okay? It was on the 13th day. We had read about how the Jewish people were preparing the 13th, which we've just completed, was a day of battle. A day of battle over the whole of Persia. On the one hand, Achashverosh could not uproot the decree of Haman to kill the Jews, but he did allow the Jews to defend themselves. So the Jews were able to stand up and fight, and thank God we won. And that's the battle that took place today on the 13th of Adar. So on the 13th of the day of the month, on the 13th day of the month of Adar, they won that battle, and then they rested on the 14th day and made it a day of feasting and celebration. That is Purim. They fought on the 13th, they rested on the 14th. Yes?
Do they describe the details of the battle? Like how did we win, how did we get the supplies, what was our military tactics?
No.
No?
That's not discussed in this.
We don't have the spirit of the tribe of Dan? No?
It's not described in detail, no. But the fact that they were able the fact that the Jewish people were able to defend themselves, that was a very significant piece of the story. Okay, then the Jews of Shushan, the Jews of Shushan mustered on both the 13th and the 14th, meaning they didn't complete their battle on the 13th, they continued to fight on the 14th as well. And as a result, they rested on the 15th and made that day the day of feasting and celebration. So the rest of the world fought on the 13th, rested on the 14th. The Jews of Shushan fought on the 13th and the 14th, and then they rested on the 15th. You hear that? That is why Jews who live in unwalled towns observe the 14th day of the month of Adar and make it a day of celebration and a holiday and an occasion for sending gifts. And then the rest of the Jews keep on the 15th. You follow that? Mordechai recorded these events, and he sent dispatches to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Ahasuerus, the 120 provinces, near and far, charging them to observe the 14th and the 15th days of Adar every year. So some people celebrate the 14th, some people celebrate the 15th. That's in the text of the Megillah.
Why was the qualifying condition what it is the law? Of all things, it's a very strange qualifying.
We're going to talk about that. So you're quite right. What you're asking, if I can say, and that we'll talk about that in the second part of our discussion, but it's an excellent question. We understand the facts. The facts are that the battle in Shushan lasted for longer. Nachon, the rest of the world, the rest of the 120 provinces managed to finish their battle on the 13th, so they celebrate on the 14th. Shushan fought for an extra day, and they only complete their battle on the 14th, so they celebrate on the 15th. So everyone knows that the rest of the world then 14th and then Shushan 15th. Your question is, why is it that particular aspect of Shushan, you could say every city that begins with the letter Shin should celebrate on the 15th.
Specifically walls from the time of Yeshua ben Nun.
Oh, so we'll come to, that's another question. Right. Oh, so let's go to source number 2, because your question's really on source number 2. The Megillah makes sense, right? Akol barur. אתה משפר גם את האנגלית, נכון? Excellent. It's such a pleasure to have you. What was your name? I can't remember. I'm so sorry. Eli Dor. Thank you so much for coming. Have a wonderful day. Okay. So now the Megillah. This is right at the beginning. This is how Megillah, the Masechet Megillah, the Talmud that talks about Purim, this is how it opens. Megillah Nikret. The Megillah is read on the 11th, on the 12th, on the 13th, on the 14th, and the 15th. Not prior to the 11th, and not after the 15th. Now, do you see this? Krachin amukafim chomam yimot Yoshua ben Nun korin b'chamisha asar. Anyone that lives in a walled city, a city that was walled at the time of Yoshua ben Nun, they read on the 15th. And then kfarim, villages, ayarot gedolot, large cities, korin b'arba asar, ela shakfarim maktirim leom haknisa. Okay, so your question is an excellent question, Shua. I understand Shushan. Why is that translate into walled cities from the time Yoshua ben Nun? Excellent question. We'll talk about that. Okay. Now the Gemara on that tells us the din of these krach hamukaf chomam yimot Yoshua ben Nun, a settlement, a village or a village, a place of living that is surrounded by a wall from the time of Yoshua ben Nun, reads on the 15th of Adar. Now the Gemara on the Mishnah adds a very, very important piece to that, and in fact it's relevant for us today. Kerach, this settlement, place where people live, v'chol hasamuch lo, and all the areas around it, v'chol hanira'a imo nidon kekrach. So therefore, it's not just the walled part of the city, but any inhabited area that is around that walled city, and anywhere where you can see the walled city, they too lane on the Megillah on the 15th of Adar. And that would explain why us here, Kiryat Moshe, is not inside the old city. But since there is, how are you doing? Shalom Aleichem Ezra. Ezra, in brackets, is a very important person, because it's really just before your Ezra Hasofer was right at the time of the Purim story.
Yeah.
Even though he's not mentioned in the Megillah, it's your time period.
Mordechai is mentioned in Ezra, though.
That is true. That's quite true. Okay. Now that would explain, do you see how what the Gemara says over here would explain why we are reading the Megillah on the 15th, even though we're not in the side of the walled part of Jerusalem, because there is uninterrupted buildings from the walled city to here, we are part of the walled city. Okay. That is the Mishnah and the Gemara, all based on the Megillah. Correct. That is true. They were built in like the 14th century. That is true. But I think these walls on the old city were built on the place where the walls stood then. But even if the walls aren't around now, it's the city that had walls at the time of Yoshua ben Nun. Right. Even if those walls are no longer here.
Why is it so important for a city to have walls that this rule applies to?
Excellent. So those are all good questions. But we will, Be'ezrat Hashem, in the second part, talk about these very unusual features. Why a walled city? Why Yehoshua ben Nun? We're going to look into that, Be'ezrat Hashem. Okay, we understand the historical context, and we understand what the rabbis did, and now we want to understand why they did it. But before we get to that, I just want to talk a little bit about which cities read on the 14th. Nowadays, we read the Gemara, and now we want to see how is that translated into what we do nowadays. Rav Melamed has an excellent book, which is actually available for no charge online, which is where I've got this.
In the library somewhere.
Yes, it's here behind us. Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
I think we have it.
Yes, we've actually got it here. But you can read it from the source sheet over here. Source number 4. Will someone read out source number 4?
Sure.
Thank you, Shua.
When the men of the Great Assembly instituted the holiday of Purim, many large cities, especially in Eretz Yisrael, had a tradition that they had been surrounded by a wall at the time of Yeshua bin Nun. The residents of these cities, therefore, celebrated Purim on the 15th of Adar. Over the centuries, however, these cities have been destroyed and the traditions regarding their status have been lost. Some modern cities, like Lod, have the same name as cities that were known to have been surrounded by a wall at the time of Yeshua bin Nun. The problem is that we do not know with certainty whether the modern city is located exactly where the city stood in Yeshua's time, or perhaps it is simply named after the ancient city, but is actually situated somewhere else nearby. Some ancient cities became devoid of Jews, and we do not know whether they existed at the time of Yeshua. Because the traditions regarding their status were lost, there are other cities such as Hebron that we know existed at the time, though we do not know if they had a wall. There is only one city concerning which there is a clear tradition that it was surrounded by a wall at the time of Yeshua bin Nun, our holy and glorious city of Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is the only place where Purim is celebrated on the 15th of Adar.
Excellent. Meaning it's the only place... Pardon? You're right. Shushan. Shushan, which is in Iran
But I doubt
nowadays.
anyone's celebrating it over there right now.
You're right, it's interesting. You're right, you're quite right. Nowadays, for all intents and purposes, it's Jerusalem, but you're right, Shushan would celebrate also on the 15th. There are other cities, as we mentioned, that there is a debate. Tiberia is a city that people wonder about. Lod was a walled city, but we're not sure if the modern city of Lod is where that old city was. So therefore, there's a debate about what people do in Lod. I have a son in Lod right now, actually, and they're celebrating today. He's got the best of all worlds because he lives in Jerusalem. So the kids from Lod who live in Jerusalem, they just come tomorrow night to make sure they hear the Megillah. So they do keep both days.
I'm from Ramle.
Huh?
I'm from Ramle.
מה אתם עושים? 14, נכון? י"ד, לא ט"ו. There's some people in Ephrat, apparently, just south of Jerusalem, who, when you get to the northernmost parts of Ephrat, where you're very close to the southernmost parts of Jerusalem, apparently there's some people there that can, perhaps can see themselves as connected to Jerusalem. There are neighborhoods in Jerusalem itself. There is a story, I'm not fully familiar with it, but there's a story about the neighborhood of Ramot. Ramot is a neighborhood in North Jerusalem. And therefore, there's like Ramot Aleph, there's Ramot Bet, there's Ramot Gimel.
Oh yeah.
Ramot.
Oh yeah, I know. And they're like part of Yerushalayim. It's my focus of whether or not they're part of Yerushalayim.
So I think now they are. I think originally it was built, sort of as a suburb of Jerusalem, built north of Jerusalem, but then it developed southwards. And as it developed southwards, it became part of Jerusalem. And really, in terms of halakha, nowadays, what is Jerusalem? I work for the municipality, as you know, the Jerusalem municipality. Anyone that pays their municipal bills, they pay their property tax in Jerusalem, so they're considered part of Jerusalem. Because they're, that's sort of they're part of the municipal boundaries of modern-day Jerusalem. That's what Jerusalem is. There are one or two places here in Jerusalem, actually right by the Tachana Merkazit. There was a rabbi who lived here just under 100 years ago, just under 100 years ago, like the 1930s, maybe approximately. His name was Rav Tukachinsky, and he was involved in a yeshiva called Yeshivat Eitz Chaim. Yeshivat Eitz Chaim has a couple of buildings right by the Tachana Merkazit.
Yeah, we walked by when we crossed the bridge.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Right, just a couple of sort of isolated exactly. Now those buildings, when they were built there was no continual building from there to the old city of Jerusalem. They're old buildings. When he lived there, it was not part of Jerusalem, it was outside of Jerusalem, and they read on the 14th of Adar. As far as I know, even until today, there are people that read there on the 14th of Adar, because they always read they're on the 14th of Adar, and there was never a time that when should we switch now to the 15th. There's one of the only places, as far as I know, that even though it's inside the municipal boundaries of Jerusalem, they still read on the 14th. It's very exciting because halakha is dynamic. This whole concept of the 14th and the 15th made this particular halakha into something very interesting. Okay.
So, I have a question, but Hebron, we know from the from the spies,
Miraglim.
that they told actually that there were huge walls surrounding the city. What Hebron specifically. So I don't know why. Shouldn't Hebron be also considered one of the cities who are surrounded by stone walls?
That's a good question.
I guess the Torah isn't good enough tradition.
No, well, where do we see? Do they speak about walls around Hebron?
I think
They
so.
speak about the valley Emek Hebron.
What if you live in Yericho?
Huh?
If you live in Yericho, what would you do?
Oh yeah, also.
Yeah, Yericho. Yeah, Yericho would be an example. Yeah, quite right. Yeah, Yericho would be a place that you would also keep on the 15th. Please God will. There was once a small Jewish community. There was an old Bet Knesset that we once visited there called Shalom al Yisrael, I think. Where years and years ago, when we first made Aliyah, we went to visit Jericho. I think it's trickier to do that nowadays, but you're quite right. That would be a city that you would also lay in on the 15th. Sorry. Okay. What I want to do now, there might be places outside of Israel as well that are concerning which there's a debate if they had walls at that time. What I want to talk about now is your questions are excellent questions. What's this notion of a walled as opposed to unwalled? Why is it Yoshua bin Nun? If anything, it should be any city that was walled at the time of Shushan, or just say only Shushan. Shushan was the city that kept till the next day. Jerusalem wasn't involved in this story. Why would you link it? Why would you link it to Yoshua bin Nun? So these are all excellent questions, and there are many different answers to these questions. I want to share with you two pieces. I want to speak to you about the Shem Mishmuel. I want to learn with you a piece about the Shem Mishmuel. He talks about why there's a different day for walled cities as opposed to unwalled cities. And then after that, look at the Ma'or Vashemesh, who has a beautiful interpretation of what's the connection to Yehoshua bin Nun. So why walled and unwalled? And then secondly about Yehoshua bin Nun. And then after that, if there are questions. Okay, so let's start with the Shem Mishmuel. To remind you, the Shem Mishmuel is Rav Shmuel Bornstein from Sokotchov, who lived about 100 years ago. I'm not sure, should I date this one? I'm not sure which year he wrote this in, but it was just over 100 years ago that he was writing. Now, he makes a very, very interesting observation. I don't know if any of you ever noticed that, but we have 12 months in the Jewish year. Mm-hmm. Out of the 12 months, 5 of the 12 months have a festival on the 15th of the month. You know, the 15th is a very special day because the 15th is a full moon. Pesach, Sukkot, Purim, Tu B'Av, and Tu B'Shvat.
Yeah.
Tu B'Shvat. So 5.
Tu B'Av isn't really a holiday.
You're right that Pesach and Sukkot are the big ones that fall out on the 15th of the month. But it's interesting that the 15th of the month is a very important day because it's the night of the full moon. Do you remember a couple of weeks ago we were talking about Kiddush HaChodesh, about the excitement of the moon? Do you remember how we were talking about this service that we pray towards facing the moon? So the 15th of the month is a very, very important day. The Shem Mishmuel says like this: Mo'adei Yisrael, the Jewish festivals, Pesach and Sukkot, Heim Kasher Sihara Ba'ash Lamuta, when the moon is complete. V'hu Tetvav L'Chodesh, on the 15th of the month. Ukvar B'tiber B'zeh HaMaharal, the Maharal of Prague, who says that Purim is on the 14th. So if we go out and look at the moon tonight, it's not complete. It's almost complete on the 14th, but Purim on the 14th is the night right before the full moon. You follow that? B'vadai lav b'mikreh haya. That's obviously not by coincidence. And now he talks about the difference between walled and unwalled. This is for you, David. Como ir prutza שהאויבים מבחוץ יכולים לבוא בה, לשלול שלל ולבוז בז, כן הוא בעת שהלהבה נפרצת. יש רשות לכוחות החיצונים כידוע ומפורסם בספרים. ועל כן מובן שאי אפשר שהיו הימים טובים אלא בשיא הרע באשלמותה, דבעוד איננה באשלמותה, אם היה אז יום טוב והיו החיצונים גם כן נוטלים ממנו, ועל כן אי אפשר שיתגלה אז אור זה אלא דווקא שהשיא הרע באשלמותה, שהוא כאילו מוקפת חומה בעת החיצונים. So he says like this, that there is a full moon is using to represent an absolute outpouring without any limitations. The full moon. Any day that's not the full moon is slightly subdued, isn't the right word, but it's slightly limited. Like when going all out without any boundaries, that is the full moon. You follow? Now, the Shem Shmuel, and this is a little bit a beautiful Hasidic idea, and this answers your question about the difference between a walled and unwalled. A walled place is safer. When I've got walls around me, I'm protected from, we're talking not about a physical wall to protect me from physical danger, but a spiritual wall, as it were, to protect me from spiritual danger. I can sort of let my hair down, I can release, I can sort of really experience total joy only when I feel absolutely safe. And I only feel absolutely safe when I'm in a safe environment. You follow? A walled environment, a walled city, is a safer environment to be in than a place without walls around it, because if there are no walls around it, then anything could come in. You follow?
Yeah, sure.
There's a certain sense of security. You know, I mean, it's a little thing, but I don't know if you've ever had this. You know, sometimes as kids, you know, you're like, as soon as you come home and you close the door, and then, now I can really sort of just absolutely relax because it's a safe environment. There are walls around me, I feel protected. So there's a sense of when I'm inside a walled environment, I'm safer than than if I am in a place with walls. You follow that? Okay. Is that clear to everybody? Now, therefore, the 14th of the month is slightly inhibited. It's not absolutely letting go because I'm not at my full potential. I'm on almost the full. I'm on the 14th. But when I get to the 15th, that's when you can let go. Does that make sense to everybody? Now, I want to add to that we're going to build up on this idea in a minute. But according to this model, and this is a very, very important thing for you to understand, the Ikar, we are biased here as Jerusalemites, but the Ikar, the main celebration of Purim, is not on the 14th, it's on the 15th. We are Jerusalem, we are the center of the world. Sometimes when you're in Jerusalem, I know kids sometimes feel that, the rest of the world is partying today, and we're just, continuing on a normal day.
This is a good party.
Thank you so much. You're quite right. This is a party.
This is the best party.
Oh, you're so right.
Water. Best party.
You're 100% correct. That was brilliant. Quite right. But we're waiting. Then once everyone else has finished their party, they're all clearing away, and then Jerusalem's still hanging on for another day. The opposite. They're on the pre-party, but the main party, the Ikar, the day of the full moon where there's no inhibitions, where it's full out connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Just like on Pesach, Sukkot, on the 15th of the month, where it is full, that's when we come to the peak of celebration, which is...
push it off even though they don't have walls and
Yeah,
say,
right.
this is the Ikar, so this is when we're going to
No, because they can't, because Purim, the truth, we'll talk about this.
I'm saying when it was instituted originally, why not?
So I think there is a danger. We'll look at what the Shem Shmuel says in a minute. But before he says, I just want to add one small piece, but it connects to what we were saying earlier. And Purim, I can't say this enough times, but I'll remind you, is actually a very complicated day. Because, like we were saying earlier, on all other days of celebration, it's much clearer for me to understand what I'm supposed to do. Shabbat, I understand the norm. I understand how to sing a zemer. On Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, even Hallel, I know how to play guitar. But Purim is like, it's sort of outside of all normal rules. You know, there are people walking around in the streets and dancing. Like the normal norms, if that is a way of saying things, are just broken. Things that are what I would do on a normal day, I just don't do them on Purim. My whole life on Purim is different to what I'm doing on every other day. So therefore, to allow myself to come to a safe environment in which I can truly connect to the depths of Purim, you need the walls. You need to be in the safest environment in order to really get Purim. So they can do it in the 14th, incomplete, outside, but the real deal where you're absolutely full moon, let go, no holes barred, if that's a phrase.
No holding back.
No holding back, thank you, that's much better. No holding back. Thank you very much, Shua. That is something that I can only do in the safe environment of Purim in Yerushalayim. And I want to reiterate to you all, as you get ready for Purim tomorrow, you really need to prepare. Do you know you understand what I'm saying? You have to prepare to get Purim right. It's not about getting drunk and just being a hooligan. It's about connecting in the deepest way to the miracle of the day. And that requires some preparation and being in the appropriate environment and dancing with the right people in the right place in order to get there, rather than going to the wrong places. You need that wall to protect us. You follow? Okay, so that's the short answer. Why it wasn't instituted for everybody? Because it's too precious. It would get out of hand if it was something available to the whole world. It's the wall that protects us, around us, to make sure that we get it right in Jerusalem. You follow?
Forget about Yeshua Ben Nun again.
Oh, we'll come to Yeshua Ben Nun. We'll come back to Yeshua Ben Nun in a minute. Why Yeshua Ben Nun? We're going to come to that. Okay. So now the Gemara tells us about battles. You know, we're learning Chassidut, so he's not talking about physical battles. This goes back to Hirsch's question of if the Megillah tells us about the battle. So the Shem Shmuel wants to suggest that the battle here is not a physical battle, but it's a spiritual one. So look at the Gemara. The Gemara in Chulin tells us about two types of battle. Did you see this? The question is, they're talking about the battle that Yaakov Avinu fought against the angel. Do you remember that?
That was a physical battle.
Oh, yeah, exactly. For Bereisha Perek Lamud Bet, Behe Avko Imo, you wrestled with this angel, as you know. So there's a debate about what the angel looked like. So Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani Amar, K'ovet Kochamim Nitmelo. He looked like an adversary, meaning it was clear to him that he was fighting evil. He was fighting somebody that looked like an idol worshipper. In the Talmud and in other places, Midrash as well, if you want to talk about the arch enemy is Oved Kochavim, someone who believes in anything other than one God. That is the essence. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, is the essence of what we believe. So an Oved Kochavim is the polar opposite. So when I see an Oved Kochavim, I understand, of course, Yaakov Avinu was involved in a struggle with the Yetzer Hara, who looks like Oved Kochavim. That is the opinion of Shmuel Bar Nachmani, Rabbi Shimon Bar Nachmani. I'm sorry. Okay, however, Rav Shmuel Bar Acha said in front of Rav Papa, in the name of Rava Bar Ula, says no. Now this is very, very scary. Do you know what he looked like? K'talmid chacham nidmelo. He didn't look like a idol worshipper. but the Yetzer Hara, not the Yetzer Hara, I'm sorry, the angel that he was wrestling with looked like a Talmid Chacham. Now that's much more scary.
Because those are the most dangerous people.
Correct, exactly. Now on this, the Shem Shmuel in source number 7, based on this piece of Gemara in Chulin, the Shem Shmuel says like this: Yesh shnei minei Yetzer Hara. There are two types of evil in the world. Yesh shemisiteo el ha'isur av sheyado shemuzar alav be'sitaho la'avor al mitzvot Hashem. V'zeh k'goy nidmeh lo. There are some times that I can see that I'm being lured and I'm being tempted in the wrong direction. There's a certain Yetzer Hara. I'm not always the strongest person in the world, and I can see myself being pulled away. But I understand that that is bad. I can see it as bad. You follow? And that's one type of battle that I find I fight against the Yetzer Hara. I hate to say terrible things. This one is so hard. The second one, Yetzer Hara, shemar'eh lo panim she'adavar mutar v'ulai od mitzvah. V'zeh k'talmid chacham nidmeh lo. But sometimes the Yetzer Hara appears to me saying, what are you talking about? This is a mitzvah. This is what God wants you to do. This is the right thing to do. And that's much harder to spot. You follow? Sometimes it's really, really hard. Because sometimes it's just a question of, I'm trying to be good, and I can clearly see that that is bad. It doesn't mean that I always win. It doesn't mean I always overcome. But it's clear to me that I'm good and that's bad. The most dangerous type of Yetzer Hara, well, not most dangerous, what's very, very tricky is when the Yetzer Hara dresses up as something good. You follow? That is really, really difficult. I'll tell you a story, people, about the Yetzer Hara. It's not a good example, but it's an example. A couple of years ago, I was in a yeshiva, where I was in yeshiva for Shabbat. I was there invited. I taught at the yeshiva, so I was there, and I was running a tish with the boys on Friday night. And it was in the...
What is a tish?
We sat down, Sharnu, Oneg Shabbat. We did an Oneg Shabbat, on Leil Shabbat, and we started about 9 o'clock in the evening, and we were singing and we were dancing, and it was the greatest, and we were like flying high. It was absolutely awesome. It was 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. Came to like 2 o'clock in the morning. 2 o'clock in the morning we finished, and then I went home, and the following morning, Shacharit in the yeshiva, Shacharit was at 8 o'clock in the morning. And then went to shul in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, and sadly, I was there, but so many of the boys that stayed up the night before, they were all in bed. And then I went and spoke to the Rosh Yeshiva, or the head of the yeshiva afterwards, and I said, we had this amazing tish last night, we sang till like 2 o'clock in the morning, and he said, yeah, but as a result of that, they all missed Shacharit this morning. Mm-hmm. You follow? So, I don't know whether that's a good example, but sometimes you have to figure out what the right thing to do is. You understand? Maybe it would have been better to finish at 10:30, go to bed, and then everyone would have made it to shul the following morning. You follow? I don't know what's good and what's bad, but sometimes it's tricky for us. You understand? Sometimes it's clear to me this is good and that is bad, but sometimes I'm drawn to something thinking that it's good, but maybe it isn't quite so good. You hear that? And you have to be wary about that. That's also a battle that I need to fight against the Yetzer Hara. I might humbly suggest, sweet people, one of the beautiful things about a yeshiva, the environment in which you find yourself, and also spending time with Rabbanim, spending time with teachers, is you get to learn from people how to make decisions. You follow? What's right and what's wrong. I'll give you one more example, just because it's so important. I just thought of it this minute, and then we'll connect it to our story. A couple of years ago, I stayed with an uncle of mine. I told you this, I'm sure. An uncle of mine, my uncle is a Rosh Yeshiva. He's an important rabbi in a yeshiva in Baltimore. And on Friday afternoon, he fell over and twisted his ankle. And his ankle was really hurting him. And his wife told him, you can't go to shul tonight, because if you go to shul tonight, you'll really do serious injury to your ankle, and you may need to go to a hospital rather than going to shul tonight, stay at home, rest your leg, and then tomorrow morning you can go to shul. He's a Rosh Hashiva. He's not, he's not somebody that doesn't take halacha seriously, takes halacha very seriously. But his wife told him to stay at home. Now, sometimes the Yetzer Hara might have said, no, you can't miss shul, and he might have gone to shul, done worse damage to his leg, and then not going to shul at all. Sometimes it's hard to know. You follow? And that's really where a mentor or speaking or observing, that's where we learn what's the right thing to do and what's the wrong thing to do. People that we admire, watching them making decisions between two options, what I perceive both of them to be the right thing to do, that's when it's complicated, and that's where I have to fight against the Yetzer Hara that looks like a Talmid Chacham. Okay, so far so good. Okay, now look at the Shem Shmuel. He says, Am Yisrael chatu b'shnei minei chataim. The Jewish people sinned with two things. One of the things they did was they bowed down to the Tselem, to the idol at the time of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, Melech Bavel, is the one that exiled the Jewish people from Israel, the destruction of the first temple. Vashti is a granddaughter, exactly. Vashti is a granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. He's mentioned at the beginning when we're introduced to Mordechai. Nebuchadnezzar exiled Mordechai. He was one that exiled him from Israel just before the destruction of the second temple, of the first temple. Nachon? I think it was 2 years before the destruction. Okay, so that was the first thing they did round. They bowed down to Avodah Zarah. And then you know that they also took part in the meal, the celebration that Achashverosh, we open with a feast that Achashverosh had. Do you remember at the beginning of the Megillah? He had this big celebration because he thought 70 years are over, the temple has not been rebuilt. It looks like the Jewish people are going to be in exile for a long time. It sounds terrible. Achashverosh wanted to celebrate that because it seems that the exile is longer. To celebrate that, he held that was the meal, and the Jewish people took part in that feast. That's the story with which we open the Megillah. Okay, so that was the second thing. The first thing is the grandfather, they bowed down to the Tselem, and the second thing is they took part in this meal. V'hinei, zeh shishtachavu l'Tselem, hi avera, shayu yodin shi avera. When they bowed down, they knew that they were doing something wrong. It's quite obvious. We know.
There are also other opinions that say it was okay for them to.
Correct. But they knew that this is an activity that is wrong. You follow? Justified, not justified in general. The three cardinal sins, that's one of them. So justified or unjust, but they knew that what they were doing is bowing, that's Avodah Zarah. It was clear to them that what they are doing is wrong. There's no question. You understood? Understand? The second thing they did wrong. What's the second thing they did? Was they took part in this meal. But taking part in this meal with Achashverosh, they thought one honor invited Achashverosh. They didn't see that as something bad.
What's Avira?
Where is that?
Avira with an
Sin.
Avera, sin.
I see.
A sin.
We learned that.
You follow? So they did two things wrong. You follow? One of them was clear to them. They bowed down, Nebuchadnezzar. And the second thing, taking part in this meal, was something that wasn't clear to them that was wrong. You follow? Both times, you understand both types of Avera. One where I think I'm doing a mitzvah. The king invites me. It's rude to say no. How could I not do?
That point, it could even be
Yeah, exactly. There are lots of ways to justify taking part in this meal. You can't say no to the king. The king invites me. How could I say no? In brackets.
Says you need to respect the king.
Yes, you should read these amazing stories just in brackets. When Rabbi Sachs was invited to the Queen of England a couple of times, he's got cute stories about when he came there and he had to make brachot, because when the queens, there are all these protocols of what you do in front of the queen, what you don't do in front of the queen. And he writes in some of his books about the experience of eating before the queen. Now, of course, the Queen of England is not like King Ahasuerus, but it's just interesting about a noble Jew navigating his place in front of royalty. Anyway, so the Jewish people took part in this meal, but when they took part in the meal, I am sure they thought they were doing the right thing. When they bowed down, they knew they were doing the wrong thing. They justified it, but they thought they were doing the wrong thing. Here, they thought they were doing the right thing. Do you understand? It's very scary. Okay, good. Now, yeah?
Sorry that I interrupt you. Even though the what they ate was kasher and it was
Exactly.
also
Bidiyuk, yafeh ma'od, they brought in all their sherim.
but you could say it was all kasher.
Nachon. Absolutely, they prepared it all. They all thought, this is wonderful. We're integrated, we're part of this Shushan society. They're doing great. They came without any Rikshei Ashma. Rikshei Ashma is guilt. Right? You might bow down in Nevud Chanetza, you'll feel awful, but I'm going to do it. It's wrong, but I'll feel awful. Here, they sat down, enjoyed the meal. They were celebrating with Achashverosh. Not so good. You follow? But no idea that they were doing something wrong. Now look at this. This is absolutely brilliant. In fact, it's so brilliant you should hold hard to your chairs because you shall get blown away. Listen to this. That is to say, Achashverosh, Haya Rak B'Shushan. Who took part in the meal in Shush? Who took part? Only the Jews of Shushan. Im Kain Sheba Shushan Yarku. שבכל העולם כולו על ירקו, והחטא שהשתחוו לצלם היה בכל העולם. ועל כן בשושן שטרחו את סטרא אחרא מכל וכל, יש להם יום טוב בסערה בשלמותה. Now listen what he says over here. This is absolutely brilliant. In Shushan, they broke both sides. In other words, they sinned by bowing, that is the Yetzer Hara that I know about, and they also sinned by taking part in the meal, which is the Yetzer Hara that I don't know about. You follow? The Yetzer Hara that looks like a Oved Kochavim is one that I know about. The Yetzer Hara like the Talmid Chacham, I don't know about. I think I'm doing the right thing. Really, I'm doing the wrong thing. They sinned in both. You follow? But then, this is what's so amazing is in Shushan, they fought the battle and overcame both. You follow? So in Shushan, they were challenged by both, but they overcame both. So it's like the rest of the world, it was doing a 10-kilometer race, and in Shushan, they were doing a marathon. Because in Shushan, they weren't just getting rid of the Yetzer Hara of bowing down to Nebuchadnezzar, they were also getting rid of the Yetzer Hara that looks like a Talmid Chacham. You follow? They were uprooting their sin of bowing down, and they were also uprooting the sin of taking part in the meal. You follow? They did that. Those 2 days of battle achieved much more than what the Jewish communities outside of Shushan managed to achieve. You follow? Does that make sense to you?
Makes sense, yeah.
How can I give you? I'm thinking. Is there an analogy I could use to explain this?
Can you give another explain?
Yeah, it went like this. Let's say, in the rest of the world, they bowed down to this idol, right? Nachon. So let's say that means they were on a score of -10. So when they won the battle, they became on a score of +10 because they overcame. You follow? They overcame, they bowed down, and they've overcome that Yetzer Hara of bowing down. So they were on -10, they're now on +10. Is that making sense? But in Shushan, they were on -20 because they sinned by bowing down, and they also sinned by taking part in this meal. So then when they got knocked down to -20, but then when they fought for 2 days, they overcame and they came to +20. You follow? Because they achieved double what everyone achieved elsewhere. They didn't just overcome the Yetzer Hara, that looks like Oved Kochavim, they also overcame the Yetzer Hara that looks like a Talmid Chacham. They fought 2 days because they fought 2 sins that they broke, and they overcame both. Does that make sense to you? Atayiti?
Yeah.
What they did in Shushan was double what everyone did outside, because they overcame both. They sinned twice, but then they overcame twice. Do you follow? And therefore, Yeshem Yom Tov B'si Hara B'Shleimuta, and that's why they can celebrate in a full moon. There is no blemish on our festival. You follow? Our festival, the Jerusalem festival, Shushan Purim, is a perfect festival. That's why it's on the 15th, like Sukkot and like Pesach. There's nothing missing in it. It's a perfect festival because I overcame all forms of Yetzer Hara, both the Nebuchadnezzar bowing down and taking part in the meal. Both the Yetzer Hara that I know about and the Yetzer Hara that I don't know about, they overcame everything. And therefore their celebration is perfect, symbolized by a full moon, as opposed to the rest of the world, which was an incomplete moon because it was an incomplete battle. They only overcame in the outside of Shushan, they only overcame against the Yetzer Hara, which is like Avodah Zarah, but not the Yetzer Hara, which is like the Talmid Chacham. Joy, one more point, and then if there's a question, Lefi Amur Yuvan. מה שהושבו כל המוקפים משושן, שהרי המוקפים בלאו-הכי הריהם יש להם מצור לרוחם. Why is it so? Why do you have this? All the cities that have got a wall around them, the wall around them is the safest, most perfect place. You follow? Because there's no contamination. It is a sealed place of goodness. You follow? And that's why the walled cities are the safest cities, the purest cities, because it's only in Shushan that they managed to uproot all forms of Yetzer Hara. Not just the Yetzer Hara that looks like Oved Kochavim, but also the Yetzer Hara that looks like a Talmid Chacham, which means that the day that we're going to celebrate tomorrow is not just postponing by a day. It's I don't know what the word. It's fundamentally different to Purim. It's double Purim. It's not just Purim of getting rid of the Yetzer Hara of Avodah Zarah, but it's also getting rid of the one that looks like a Talmid Chacham. You follow? It's complete. That's why it's on the 15th. Joy, happiness, questions. Ezra, does that make sense?
No, yeah.
So the
Harsh.
the Empire of Paras had 127 provinces. 127?
Correct.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay. Kol baru lecha. Madhim. Isn't that amazing? Look, can we just breathe that in for 1 minute?
Can I ask you a question?
And Iraq mafnim et zeh.
Can I ask
Ken.
you a
Of
question?
course. It's such a joy that you're here.
Even
V'adayin lo
even
azavta.
a king that is Jewish,
Ken.
but he's a bad king.
Oi. Hayu ka'ile.
So if they also eat in his meal, they also
Oh, good question. Lo, ani lo choshev. Here was a celebration. It was a celebratory meal. Achashverosh's meal. You know, there's a story. There was the son. Was he the son of Nebuchadnezzar? Belshazzar.
With the writing.
Yeah. Belshazzar was the son of Nebuchadnezzar, and he did a calculation. 70 years after the Jewish people were expelled, we're told in Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah the prophet, says that the exile will be for 70 years. He calculated 70 years, realized that there's no second temple coming up, so he decided to have this big feast. Belshazzar, that's when there was writing on the wall in Aramaic saying you're going to... And in fact, that night he was killed. That was the night that Belshazzar was killed. Then, that was a couple of years before this particular meal. This meal that we're talking about over here, Shalom. Oh, can you hear the singing upstairs?
Start putting us tomorrow.
Is a yofi. Anyway, so this meal over here was similar to that meal that Belshazzar had previously. It's now 2 years. I think it may be 2 years, but it might be more years afterwards, Achashverosh did a similar calculation, also realized 70 years, or based on this prophecy from Jeremiah, has passed. So it's not the fact that it was a non-Jewish king, it was celebrating the fact that the temple, Chas v'Sholom, according to his calculations, was not going to be rebuilt. So it was a celebration of the end of the Jewish people.
And he said, I'm a king, so now...
Ken, that's right, the kelim mikelim shonim, using the kelim of the Beit HaMikdash. So the point is not Jewish king, non-Jewish king. It was like a celebration of the end of the Jewish peoplehood in Eretz Yisrael.
So, Rabbi,
And look, here we are now in Yerushalayim Mir HaKodesh. Unbelievable. Yes.
So, if you're saying that there's two parties by two kings, one's Jewish, one's not Jewish, the Jewish king is for some reason celebrating that between the Jewish not going to be built, and the non-Jewish king is having a celebration for something else. You're supposed to go to the non-Jewish king over the Jewish king?
No. So it's unlikely there would be a Jewish king that would be have a celebration
Right.
of the end of the Jewish shop, because he's a Jewish king. So it would be unlikely that he'd be having a celebration like that. It was.
But you're allowed to go eat with the queen no matter what.
Yeah, that's
no
not.
problem.
Yeah, the problem
It's just
here.
if the queen for some reason, or if the queen or the new king for some reason decides to make a party that
Yeah.
the Beit HaMikdash will not be rebuilt again, then you're not allowed to go eat.
Excellent point. The problem is not eating with a non-Jewish king. As we mentioned earlier, Rabbi Sachs was often invited to the queen. That's not the problem at all. Chas v'Sholom. In fact, it can, in many cases, be a great Kiddush Hashem when a religious Jew is invited to be part of a royal meal. The problem here, likewise. The problem here is not that it was eating with royalty. The problem is that the reason why Achashverosh was having this meal was a celebration of the end of Jewish life in Eretz Yisrael, because he thought the Jewish people weren't coming back. I just want to remind you just how incredible it is to sit here in Jerusalem and to say those words. Isn't that amazing? Because we are here thousands of years after that meal, and we're on our way back. We're Atchalta de Geula. Isn't that amazing? We're living the prophecy. We're living, it's just remarkable. The world we're living in now is the world of the rebuilding of the Jewish people in the land of Israel, which is the opposite, the polar opposite of his Su'udah. So his meal wasn't about going to a non-Jewish king. It was about celebrating the end of Jewish peoplehood. And that was what was wrong. And that was only the people of Shushan. And we overcame that Yetzer Hara. That's what that's what the Jews of Shushan overcame. 2 days. And that's why they had this complete celebration. It's not just postponing by a day. It is on a totally different level. It's a double. It's an awful analogy. But if Purim is a 10K, so then this is a marathon. That's the achievement that we achieved in Shushan, overcoming both is double what was achieved outside. Okay, now I want to go to Yoshua bin Nun. Shua's question. Yoshua bin Nun. Why Dafka the time of Yoshua bin Nun? Everything we said is beautiful, but then I would have assumed that we are going to say that every city that was walled at the time of Shushan. Nachon, why the time of Yoshua bin Nun? So let's...
Just walled. As soon as you build a wall, it should qualify.
Oh, excellent, correct, good point. Excellent. Why? What's the connection between this story and Yoshua bin Nun? Why the need to link? Well, why did the Talmud link this story? Link it to Yoshua bin Nun. So I'm going to start with the Rambam that tells us the halacha, and then we'll look at two interpretations. Is that okay? The Rambam says like this: Shushana bira afa pi shelo hayta mukefet choma bimei Yoshua bin Nun korin b'chamisha asar sheba haya hanes. Now, there's one city that was not walled at the time of Yoshua bin Nun. Do you know what city that is? Shushan. Shushan wasn't walled at the time of Yoshua bin Nun. So you'd have this crazy sort of situation where the city where it happened wouldn't celebrate to commemorate the event that took place there. So Rambam qualifies that by saying, even though Shushan was not walled at the time of Yoshua ben Nun, since Shushan is Shushan, therefore we would always keep in Shushan on the 15th. You follow? That's a Rambam. V'lama talu adavar b'mei Yoshua. This is your question. Why dafka Yoshua? Kadei lachlok kavod le'eretz Yisrael. in order to show respect to the land of Israel, Shaita Chareva Bo'oto Azman. You know this, the story.
Any city within Israel that had a wall when Yeshua was alive would not have been a Jewish city. It couldn't have been.
It's not all. It's about lachlok kavod le'Eretz Yisrael. Really, to link this story to Eretz Yisrael. The time of the Purim story we were talking earlier was just before Ezra, although Ezra and Mordechai were contemporaries. So it was during the time of Ezra.
Yeah.
But it was not a time of great like a revival of the Jewish people here in Israel. I think there is a debate between historians that I don't fully understand about whether the Purim story, had they started building the second temple before the Purim story, or had they not started building it. But in any event, it wasn't doing very well at that time. There was originally a group of Jews that came to start building the second temple.
First wave.
Koresh sent them, but they were the people, the Am Haaretz, the people who were in the land at that time, the non-Jews here, were objecting to the building, so it was ceased. Either the Purim story took place during that pause where they'd started, but they'd paused building the second temple, or before they even started. In any event, Eretz Yisrael was not blooming at the time of the Purim story, and therefore, as the Rambam says, it's to give kavod to the land of Israel. Kadei shiyu korin kivnei Shushan v'yachshavu ki'ilu hein krachin hachomot afal pi she'en ata charevin hoel v'hayu mukafim b'mei Yoshua v'yeh zikaron Eretz Yisrael b'nes zeh. Really to connect this story to the land of Israel. That's what the Rambam is saying over here. So you can't have a situation where this beautiful city, Shushan, at the time people are laning. So we want to say even the cities of Jerusalem, of Israel, that may at that time, of the end of the first temple period, they may have been in ruin at that time, and Jerusalem probably was in ruin at that time. Nevertheless, they would keep it in Jerusalem like Shushan, because we go by the time of Yoshua ben Nun, not by the time when the story actually happened. So that's the Rambam, really lachlok kavod le'Eretz Yisrael, to show our love for the land of Israel. So our celebration tomorrow will be a beautiful expression of our love for the land of Israel. That's a Rambam. I want to look at two more recent interpretations that speak specifically about Joshua. Why? Here he's saying the time, sort of, according to the Rambam, the Jewish people entered the land of Israel at the time of Joshua. So it's not about Joshua, the person, it's about when the Jewish people entered the land of Israel. So whatever was in the land of Israel when we entered it, it has to be at some period when we were living in the land of Israel. So let's make it the beginning, which is Yoshua, which is really the Rambam. However, the second two interpretations that we'll look at very quickly now say no, it's about Joshua specifically. This is from the Torah Tamima. Torah Tamima was about 100 years ago, written by Rabbi Epstein. What was his first name? Machon Meir. Torah Tamima. The Torah Tamima, just by the by, was written by a Talmid Chacham who was not a Rosh Yeshiva. He avad. He worked, and he wrote his incredible linkage between the written Torah and the oral Torah. Often on each verse he will cite the Talmud whenever the Talmud quotes the verse and give his interpretation of that verse. So here he wrote a commentary on the 5 books of the Torah and on the 5 Megillot. So this is a comment that he wrote on the Megillah. Mitahaya Yoshua bin Nun Harishon Shelacham ba'Amalek Rosh leMishpachat Haman u'misado v'higbil et tchumei Eretz Yisrael va'area lechen kav'o zman hamukafin al shemo. So according to the author of the Torah Tamima in his commentary on Megillat Ruth, Yoshua, as we read at the end of Beshalach, was the first one to fight Amalek. You hear that? Amalek is Haman. So therefore, the first one to fight Amalek is the one who's honored in the story over here by saying all the cities were at the time of him.
By overcoming Amalek.
Yeah, exactly, by overcoming Amalek. So it's really linking the Torah story to the Esther story, making the sort of connection between Mordechai and Haman versus Amalek and Yoshua. There's a certain parallel there. You see, Mordechai against Haman, Yoshua against Amalek. So we want to link, it's really one long Jewish story. That's what the Torah Tamim says. And finally, Ma'or Vashemesh. Listen what he says. Chazal. Pnei Moshe kifnei Chama, Pnei Yoshua kifnei Levana. Your Gemara tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu was like the sun, Yoshua was like the moon. Hard to understand. Mipnei ma b'yimei Moshe matzanu kama pamim shenisu avotenu et hamakom, v'yimei Yoshua ne'emar v'yavdu ha'em et Hashem kol yimei Yoshua v'lo matzanu lehem shum chet. Hagam shehaya madrigato lemata harbe ma'od mimadrigat Moshe Rabbeinu. So he asks a question. He says, Moshe Rabbeinu was like the sun. Yoshua was the reflected light of Moshe Rabbeinu. He was like the moon. Nachon? Moshe was the sun, Yoshua was the moon. That's what we're told in the Gemara and Bava Batra. There are many, many interpretations of how to understand that metaphor, sun and moon. Yes?
If הבנתי נכון, how to say,
If you
if
understand.
I understand it right,
Okay.
Moshe Rabbeinu was his darga,
Okay, level.
level was so high like the sun was brightening.
Ken.
And Yeshua ben Nun, it was like not so bright, so the Bnei Yisrael
Yafeh ma'od.
were attracted to not to the sun, to the other.
Because they could see
They
it.
can go after it.
Yafeh. Excellent. Yafeh ma'od. As yesh harmon, there are lots of ways to interpret this relationship. And one is that Moshe Rabbeinu was sort of out of touch. He was sort of so great. Just like we can't look at the sun. You can't look at the sun, but we can look at the moon. I can relate. So the moon reflects the sun, and then I can connect to the sun through the moon. Yafeh ma'od. Excellent. Now, what the Ma'or Vashemesh asks, and really what you're saying is an answer, although he says something else here. He says, if we look at these two great leaders, Moshe and Yehoshua, we are told at the beginning of the book of Shoftim, the book of Judges, which comes immediately after the book of Joshua, we're told that the Jewish people served God all the years of Yehoshua. There was no rebellion during the time of Yehoshua. And yet, if we compare that to Moshe Rabbeinu, there was much rebellion at the time. There was the Meraglim that we know about, the Egel HaZahav. There were moments when there was no water, Korach, excellent. Many times when people challenge this. So ask the Ma'or Vashemesh, how is it that the great leader, the sun, was challenged, but the lesser leader, the moon, Yoshua, wasn't challenged? Everybody accepted God. He seemed to have the people more more connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, less rebellious, more in line, more following God's will in the time of Joshua, more than the time of the leader of leaders, Moshe Rabbeinu. How can that be? That's what he asks.
They say here because his level was not so high, so they can go after him.
Oh, excellent. So listen what he says. Excellent. אמנם האמיננו כי ין שהייתה מדרגת משה גבוה הרבה כבחינת חמה שאי אפשר להסתכל בה מגודל הבהירות, לכן לא היו יכולים להתדבק במדרגתו ונפלו ממדרגתם כמה פעמים. אבל מדרגת יהושע הייתה נוחה לישראל להתדבק בו כבחינת לבנה שנוח להסתכל בו, ולכן עלתה בידם להתדבק במדרגה זו.
You know what this reminds me? Imagine like a rab that is kula. You know what is kula?
As opposed to a chumrah.
Yes.
Okay.
He does a kula, so you go after a kula, not a chumrah.
Yafeh. Yafeh.
It's like that.
So he says...
I don't think it's right, but...
No, I also don't like that. But what he does say, I'm not sure, that's not good.
The chumrah is Moshe Rabbeinu.
No, but it's not about chumrah and kula. It's Moshe Rabbeinu was in a totally different space to the people. A leader in some ways is somebody who connects the people with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But in order for me to be an effective leader, I need to be connected both to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and also to the people in order to be a channel, in order to be an effective connection. But if I'm so far away, then it's very hard. I'll give you, it's an awful example. But let's say there's a guy who is a postdoc postdoc in mathematics, right? He's doing some sort of research. We wouldn't even understand what he's talking about. He is a math genius, right? And you bring him into a classroom and you ask him to teach somebody in ninth grade. So he may not necessarily be able to teach this kid in ninth grade because he's in a different world to them.
I had a teacher like that in math.
Oh,
Really,
it's like a different world.
He wasn't genius in math, but he couldn't teach.
Oh,
Like every time he was teaching, like me and all the class, we didn't understand anything.
oh, exactly. And then you get somebody
Right.
who might have a bachelor's degree. You know, they've got a BA. This guy's postdoc, finished his PhD, and you've got somebody who's done a BA in maths. But they're a brilliant teacher because they're on the same wavelength. You follow? So the difference between Moshe and Yoshua is that Moshe Rabbeinu was the sun. You can't look at it. He's just way above. But the moon, so I can see. You follow? I can relate to the moon. So when we are connecting to Yoshua bin Nun, it's connecting to the leader that I can relate to. You follow? So the walls from the time of Yoshua bin Nun, Dafka, the walls, cities from the time of Yoshua bin Nun, because the greatness of Yoshua bin Nun is that he was the leader that everybody could relate to. We're told concerning Yoshua, this is what we said, Vayavdu Ha'am et Hashem kol yemei Yehoshua. The Jewish people served God all the days of Yoshua. They had some sort very powerful skill that Yoshua managed to maintain this relationship both with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and with the Jewish people, such that there was no rebellion during the whole time of Yoshua. And we want to celebrate that. And therefore, the walled cities from the time of Yoshua bin Nun. Those are the words of the Ma'or of HaShemesh. So, sweet, wonderful people. I just want to summarize in a minute, and then we'll bring our discussion to a close. And then if anyone's got any questions. We asked about the difference between the 14th and the 15th of Adar. Why are they two separate days? And we said there was a one-day battle for the rest of the provinces of Persia, and they fought on the 13th, celebrated on the 14th. Shushan, two battles, 13 and 14, and they rested on the 15th. And then we said there are two types of battle. There's a battle against the Yetzer Hara, where I know the Yetzer Hara is telling me to do something bad, like bowing down to Nebuchadnezzar. Everyone knows that's bad. And everyone overcame that. We all fought on the 13th, and we all overcame that battle. But there was a second Yetzer Hara that drew only the people of Shushan. Only the people of Shushan were drawn into this second Yetzer Hara, and that is taking part in the feast of Achashverosh. Now this was a Yetzer Hara that the people sitting there didn't have any pangs of guilt. The people sitting there thought that they were doing the right thing. That's a much more dangerous Yetzer Hara. But the people of Shushan fought on the 13th and the 14th and overcame both. And therefore, when they celebrate, their celebration is a complete celebration on the full moon, 15th, rather than the incomplete celebration that the rest of the world keeps on the 14th. You follow that, everybody? Then we spoke about the walls as a protection because I can, sort of release all my energy on the 15th. Then we spoke about why Dafka Yehoshua bin Nun, and we gave three things. A Rambam, Yoshua bin Nun connects us to Eretz Yisrael because it was a time of Yoshua, because the story happened not at a time of great flourishing in the land of Israel, between the destruction of the first temple and the second temple, perhaps just in the halt in the construction of the second temple. It's to give us, to connect to a glorious period of the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael. That's a Rambam. According to Torah Tamima, he says it's Amalek. The connection is Amalek. Yoshua fought Amalek. Mordechai fought Haman. That's why we're connecting. It's a continuation of the same story, goes from generation to generation. And Ma'or Hashem is talking about the unique character of Yoshua, the leader, that he was able to lead the people in a way that no one rebelled. Everybody was connected because he was a leader with whom the people could relate. So I want to bless us all as we prepare today on the 14th for the amazing, incredible day that we have tomorrow on the 15th, that we should, Be'ezrat Hashem, tap into the energy of this important day tomorrow in order to overcome the Yetzer Hara that looks like Avodah Zarah, but also the Yetzer Hara that looks a little bit like the Talmid Chacham. Purim Sameach, Yishar Koach to all of you. Chazak u'Baruch, tizku lemitzvot. Yesh she'elot?